with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today, we have a hell of a job for you. It is a 3.0 to 3.4 liter swap on a second generation 4Runner. This guy Brendan from Reno, Nevada contacted us via Instagram, and he was inquiring, hey guys, are you interested in this project? So at first I was going to pass on it, but then I contacted Nick at MotorWest Performance, and he had told me there usually isn't one day that goes by that somebody doesn't ask about that swap. So I reconsidered and I called Brendan. I said, yep, let's do it. What Brendan did is he found a used 3.4 liter engine and he bought it from this guy who was going to use it for a customer of his. The project he bought it for fell through, and so Brendan bought that engine from him. What we found out is that engine wasn't in the greatest shape. It was damaged from the people pulling it. The throttle body was bent up and messed up because I'm guessing the chains that they used to pull the motor rested up against it, bent the shit out of it. It had some other things that were missing, and we covered those in the video. When I mentioned this job to Nick at Yoda1, he says what they usually do for these type of swaps is they get a whole donor vehicle, so they have everything that they need from that donor vehicle to put on the second generation 4Runner. Because it's not just the engine, you have to swap over other things like the evap canister. You need an igniter, you need a mass airflow sensor. You're going to want to use the power steering pump from the 3.4. There's all those other little associated parts that if you don't get the whole donor vehicle, you're going to have to go searching for them. So originally, Brendan has some guys he knows in the Reno area. They operate a wrecking yard, and they promised him over and over again they were going to come through for him and get him all the accessory parts that he needed to complete this job. At the 11th hour, they failed and didn't get him what they promised him. So we were stuck. The day before he was supposed to drive to San Jose for us to start this job, he didn't have a lot of those parts. I ended up messaging Josh Young on Facebook. Josh Young is a guy who parts out 3rd and 4th gen 4Runners in Washington, and within about 15 minutes of messaging Josh, he got back to me and said that he had all those parts we needed, which was awesome. So I asked him to send all those parts second day air for us, and he came through and got everything we needed. If you were in the same situation like we were and you needed some parts that you couldn't find at a pick and pull, and you just got an engine like Brendan did and didn't have a line on all those other accessory parts I mentioned, then I would suggest contacting Josh Young. And I'm going to put a link in the video description to his business that he operates in Washington. And maybe he could help you out with your project too by getting you some of the needed parts for a very fair price. When you do this job, you have options of how you do it. You can buy a used engine that you find somewhere in the United States. You can buy a used engine that came from Japan, a JDM engine. Or you can go the route that we did, which was we got a brand new remanufactured engine from MotorWest Performance. If you have the money, going with a remanufactured engine from a quality rebuilder like MotorWest Performance is ideal because you're doing a hell of a lot of labor to pull the old engine and get the 3.4 in. And so if you plan on keeping this rig for a long time, like you're gonna keep it forever and pass it down through the generations, you're maybe gonna give it to a son or daughter eventually, then I would do the investment and get yourself a nice remanufactured engine, so you're not going to find that you get a used engine in there and then unfortunately find out it wasn't the greatest engine, and now you're pulling it all over again to put another engine in. It depends how much you value your time. Time is money, and do it once and do it right and you're done with it. So that's what we suggest. Get a remanufactured engine from a quality rebuilder, and there's none better, in my opinion, than MotorWest Performance of Riverbank, California. The company that really made this swap possible is ORS, Off-Road Solutions. They specialize in all the custom things you need for these type of motor swaps. They make a custom wiring harness to your specifications. So you tell them, hey, I have an automatic transmission, I have this or that, and they build the harness to your specification. We not only use their custom wiring harness for this project, but we use other custom things that they make that make this job way easier. One of them is the crossover pipe they make, because a second generation 4Runner has the exhaust running on the driver's side, but on a 3.4 liter engine, the exhaust is running on the passenger side. So you have to have a different crossover pipe that joins the exhaust manifolds and then brings the exhaust to the driver's side. So ORS makes that. They also make some cool headers if you wanted to go that route, and Brandon did choose to go that route, and he put the ORS headers on with the custom crossover pipe. ORS also makes a custom connection from the crossover pipe to where a muffler shop can easily create the tailpipe to the muffler section without having to make a custom adapter to mount to the crossover pipe and lead to the pipe that goes to the O2 sensors, to the catalytic converter, to the muffler, and to the tailpipe. They also make other things that make doing this job much easier, like a evap canister bracket. They make a battery relocation tray and bracket, and they also make a custom air intake for a cold air intake. They also make a fuse box cable extension, because the fuse box is on the passenger side when normally on a 3.4 liter engine it's on the driver's side. So they make that cable for you. And all those little things that they make just make the job way easier for you, so you don't have to figure those things out. They did it for you. So without a doubt, the ORS company is so helpful if you're going to do this job. Yes, you're going to have to spend some money on those parts, but in our opinion, it's money well spent. If you like analyzing wiring diagrams till your eyes are bleeding, go for it. But I'd rather spend the money and let the experts make my wiring harness for me, so I don't have to deal with that. They do it for you. The guys at ORS, Mike and Derek, were super helpful. When we were stumped with something, we gave them a call and they helped us through it. They weren't always available because we ended up choosing a weekend to do this job when they happened to be doing a work retreat in Moab, Utah, so we weren't always able to contact them. And that's those instances where I was calling Nick at Yoda One to pick his brain to help us out. Another company we would like to thank for helping with this project is Mitchell Muffler in Modesto, California. I learned about Mitchell Muffler from Nick. Nick suggested that we bring the rig to Mitchell Muffler because those guys do really good custom muffler work. Larry, who's the manager at Mitchell Muffler, got us in there. They did awesome work for us. And so if you're in the Bay Area and you're not too far away from Modesto, we highly recommend that you consider Mitchell Muffler for your custom exhaust needs because they do really awesome work, which you are going to see near the end of the series. Another company I would like to thank is Stevens Creek Toyota in San Jose, California. I've gotten to know the guys at the parts counter over the last 5.5 to 6 years we've been running this channel, and those guys are awesome. They're all super helpful, and so when we needed to get parts at the last minute, we were able to drive there and those guys were able to get us the parts in one day. If they don't have the parts in stock at Stevens Creek Toyota, they could usually get them in one day from their San Francisco warehouse, which is really convenient, and you don't have to wait for mail order, which can take like, who knows, 5 days or more. Having a good local dealer is very helpful for a project like this. So make friends with your parts department guys at your local dealer. Maybe bring them some Starbucks gift cards or bring them some donuts or bagels or whatever. Get in with their good graces because guys at your local dealership parts department can help you out a lot when it comes to finding the parts you need. I would also like to thank my buddy Ton for showing up a couple days and helping us with this. He helped out when we were stripping the old engine and cleaning up parts, and he also helped on the day that we were pulling the 3.0 liter engine. So thank you, Ton, for showing up and being here for us. Without a doubt, it's nice having extra hands for a job like this because some things you just can't be in two places at one time. Somebody's got to be on the engine hoist while a couple other guys are watching the engine go in, make sure you're not hitting anything or breaking anything, and then you need someone underneath the vehicle, like checking for the alignment of the engine with the transmission. So multiple people is very integral in making this a much easier job to do. So cash in your favors that you have owed to you by your friends and get them over your place and help you out. Now, finally, why would you want to do this swap? The main reason is that 3.0 liter Toyota engine isn't the greatest. Usually Toyota makes pretty darn good engines, but that 3.0 liter engine leaves a lot to be desired. Number one, it's underpowered. Number two, it's known for head gasket problems. So the popular swap is going to the 3.4 liter engine, which is well known to be very durable, long lasting, decent power. And so it's the obvious engine to go to from the 3.0 to the 3.4 on the second gen 4Runner. Another nice thing about the 3.4 is it's a little bit more plug and play than if you chose another engine to swap into your second gen 4Runner. For instance, the motor mounts line up. If you use the motor mount brackets and the motor mounts from a 3.0, it will bolt up perfectly in the second gen 4Runner. There's no custom motor mount brackets you need to make or anything like that. It's pretty much plug and play when it comes to that. The other reason to go with the 3.4 liter is it's a pretty darn easy engine to work on, and there's lots of information out there to be able to work on it, like you can get from our channel. For this job, we set aside 4 days of wrenching and then a 5th day to drive to Modesto to a Mitchell Muffler to get the muffler work done and do the final shot at YOTA 1 Performance. As it ended up, we needed a 5th day of wrenching and then the 6th day to get the muffler work done and finish up the video at YOTA 1 Performance. We highly recommend you don't try to do it in that quick of a time period. We did it that way because we only had that many days. Brendan trailered his rig from Reno, Nevada, and he only had so much time out of his personal schedule to make this happen. And then also for Sean and I, we only had so much personal time in our schedules to make it happen. So we wrenched from sun up to sundown 5 days in a row. This by far was the hardest project Sean and I have done, and we were successful, but it was stressful because time was ticking and there was a lot of little hurdles that just kept on eating up time, eating up time. We don't recommend you being in a rush for this. Take your time with it, wrench on it a few hours one day, set it aside, and then work on it the next week, and just get your rig in a spot where you could sit for a while and you're not going to be stressed for time like we were. Because if a couple other little things happened and hamstrung us, like needing a part that we couldn't get right away, we wouldn't have finished this job. The gods were on our side for this one, and we pulled it off. It wasn't hard because the actual job was hard. It was hard because of the time constraints. So if you have plenty of time for this project, you won't find that it's super difficult. It's just time consuming. Brendan had remember reading that most people do the swap over like a 3-week to month period. They just take their time and get it done slowly and make sure they don't make any mistakes. We should probably be inducted into the Toyota Hall of Fame for pulling this off in such a short period, or maybe we'll be entered in the Guinness Book of World Records for 3.0 to 3.4 swaps because we knocked it out pretty darn quick. Finally, like a lot of our jobs, we use some specialty tools that you'll need, like an engine hoist, an engine stand, and other special tools that you'll watch us using in the video. I always say make the investment in tools because they will pay for themselves if you use them. An engine stand and an engine hoist aren't things you're going to be using all the time, but maybe you know somebody that has one, a friend, and this way maybe you could borrow from them, use it, and then give it back to them, and that will save you from purchasing them and then having to store them and take up room in your garage. Harbor Freight makes a nice engine hoist. That's the engine hoist we're going to use in this job. They also make engine stands. The 2-ton engine stand that they used to make, I don't think is available anymore, but I found one available on the JAGS website. We'll provide links to the engine hoist, engine stands, and all the other tools we used to accomplish this job in the video description. If you decided to get a remanufactured engine like Brendan did from YOTA 1 Performance, you're going to need to strip down the old 3.4 liter engine and build up the new engine. We're not going to show all of that. We're only going to show the parts that are specific for this swap because we already show all that detail in the other swap we did, that 3.4 to 3.4 swap we did, which details the complete strip down and the complete buildup of a YOTA 1 engine. If you click on the link above, you'll see those videos that you can reference if you need them. Sean and I are all about empowering people to do their own projects. This is a very involved project, but you know that the way we make our videos, we are going to walk you through step by step by step so you can do it, hopefully with the help of some friends. With all that said, let's get started with this job. We're going to start with the steps you need to take to get your 3.0 liter V6 engine out of your second gen 4Runner. To start off, we're going to get the front skid plate off the vehicle. We're going to get the coolant draining, and we're going to drain the engine oil. If you don't know how to remove your skid plates, don't do this job. We've got the engine coolant and oil draining. Now we're going to remove the hood. And we used a little Sharpie to mark the hinges so we can get the hood back onto the hood hinges in the proper alignment so the hood's going to close properly after we get done putting this 3.4 liter engine in the second gen 4Runner. The first thing we're going to do is Ton, our helper Ton, is going to remove the window washer connection to the hood. I'm going to hold the other side.
Yep.
And that's disconnected. Now we've got two 14 millimeter bolts on each hood hinge, and we're going to zip those out with the Milwaukee ratchet. Brendan, you can see, was holding this so it wouldn't just slide down and hit the body. I'm going to get the other side. Where are we going to put this thing? Next, we're going to remove the battery. 10 millimeter nuts on the electrical connections and 12 millimeter fasteners for the battery bracket. The next thing we're going to remove is this whole airbox assembly. The first thing I'm going to do to accomplish that is I'm going to remove the mass airflow sensor connector. They have a unique type of connector. It's just like you would find on an older 4Runner or pickup. It's got these little metal clip, and you got to pull those out enough to where the connector will come out. You want to get this metal clip back in position so it won't fall out. Just get it back over the top and then you won't lose it. Next, I'm going to disconnect this hose that attaches to the air tube near the throttle body. It has an easy squeeze clamp. See if I can break that free. Yep, that came free. I'm going to take a 10 millimeter socket and I'm going to undo the clamp here that attaches the air tube to the throttle body. And then I'm going to undo it here to the air box and see if I can fish this whole section out. Ooh, that one's stiff. Let's see if I can pull it off of this side first. There we go. We also have a clamp down here that we have to release. To get to that lower one, I'm going to use this little short extension in a short 10 millimeter socket. See if I can get in there. Nope, I still can't get in there. I'm going to remove the dipstick and get it out of my way. Maybe that's the deal. That'll work. The dipstick was in my way. Okay, now we can see if we can remove this. Maybe not. Maybe I have to remove the air box as one unit, or I can maybe remove it from here. Maybe take this off in a couple pieces. I'm going to remove this one right here. Now maybe I can move this. Yeah. There we go. There we go. Now that's disconnected. What else? We're going to remove this hose that attaches to the air box next. Using a bent nose, needle nose pliers, just compress the clamp, move it back. Give it a twist, see if we can get it off. Okay, that's off. And then we're going to do the second one. It looks like the air box is attached to the body with three 12 millimeter bolts. One here. One down through here. And then this one down here near the overflow reservoir. Goes to show what you know, Brendan.
I don't know anything.
The next thing we're going to work on is getting the radiator out. I'm first going to take out the upper radiator hose. You'll a lot of times find they're really tight on there. You get a hose pick in there and it'll loosen it. This is a hose pick tool. You just get it between the hose and the fitting, work it around, and you should be able to remove it. Next, we're going to remove the lower radiator hose. Same process. Release the clamp, slide it back, use a pick tool, loosen the connection, and pull it off. We're not going to bother removing the lower radiator hose from the thermostat housing neck. We'll do that later. Next, we're going to remove the 10 millimeter bolts that hold the fan shroud onto the radiator. So we're just going to push the fan shroud towards the engine, get it out of our way. And now we're going to work on the four 12 millimeter bolts that hold the radiator to the body. And you get them from the engine compartment side. This lower bolt for the radiator on the passenger side was kind of a bear because of the way the radiator is formed. The radiator body gets in the way of you getting a straight shot. So Sean came up with a good fix. We just went to a 1/4 inch ratchet, and then the extension is a little bit thinner, and it was able to get a straight shot onto the 12mm bolt. So now we're finally getting it out. Okay, now for the ones on the driver's side. This is a good representation of what we were fighting on the passenger side. The body of the radiator gets in the way of you getting a straight shot. So we're gonna go to the 1/4 inch on that one too. There's an upper shroud and a lower shroud. We're gonna disconnect the lower shroud from the upper shroud, and then maybe we can get this radiator out. It's got a little tab here. So now we can remove this sucker. So just to give you a better bird's eye view of what you're doing with these clips, you have to pull it up, and then you can remove this piece off the bottom, and then you can separate the two halves, and then you can pull them out individually. And then now we should be able to pull this radiator up. You're gonna find there's still some coolant in here, so we're gonna drain it out a little more. Next, we're gonna remove the fan clutch. Usually they're held on with 12mm flange nuts. I found on this engine they're 13mm, pretty odd. If you're lucky, you can get on here, and just from the tension of the belt, it will release, but you can see that the belt's coming with it, so that's not gonna work. So you have to get in here and hold the fan clutch steady with a screwdriver or a small pry bar, and then see if you can hold it steady while you break one free. So you just get underneath one of the nuts with your small pry bar or maybe a small screwdriver, and then that should hold it firm enough to where you can break it free. And once it's broken free, you should be able just to get your fingers in there and spin them off. Unless you're dealing with a lot of corrosion, then maybe you're not so lucky. And then usually you'll find when you try to pull it off, the fan clutch is a little bit stuck on the studs. You just got to wiggle it, and then just be careful. Don't pull with a ton of force because you're going to slam right into your AC condenser. Just like I just did right there. Okay. And now with the fan clutch out of the way, there's a little slop on the belt. You can just slide this off, get this belt off too. And then it looks like I might be able to get this belt off too. Look at that. You didn't have to mess with any tensioners. The AC one we're gonna have to deal with because we have to disconnect the AC compressor to get the engine free. To get the AC belt off, I'm gonna loosen the 14mm nut that holds the tensioner firm for this AC idler pulley. Just back it off a little bit, and then I have to work the tensioner behind. It's a bolt with a 14mm head. Should be able to slip the belt off. There it is, and get this other belt out of the way. I'm gonna disconnect the coil wire from the distributor cap. If you get a little pick tool, you can get behind the clip, ow, and stab yourself, and pull it back. Next, I'm gonna disconnect this electrical connector to the alternator, 10mm nut. You can just pull this off. Then I'm gonna disconnect the electrical plug to the alternator. These can be pretty stubborn. You push the tab and you pull back. Sometimes two hands is better, so that's disconnected. Next, we're gonna disconnect this ground strap right here. That attaches to the driver's side fender, 10mm bolt. We're gonna put this bolt right back in here so we don't lose track of it. We're gonna disconnect this connector, push in, pull out. The wiring that attaches to the oil pressure sending unit also has a connector that runs down to the four-wheel drive actuator. So we're gonna disconnect that connector that goes to the four-wheel drive actuator. So when we pull the engine, it's not gonna be pulling on this connection. Okay, go. Hold on, go. There he goes. We used some teamwork on that one. We're gonna remove this ground strap. It's got a connector in between the plenum and to the body. It looks like you could pull up on this and then separate it. Let's see how that works. Just like that. Okay, that's disconnected. Next, we're gonna work on disconnecting the wiring harness from the ECU. The ECU on a 2nd gen 4Runner is in the passenger side kick panel right below the area where the glove box is. To get this kick panel off, we're first gonna have to remove this plastic trim right above the rocker panel. It's held on with screws, Phillips or JIS. I'm gonna zip them out with my gun. There we go. These screws aren't coming out very easily, so I'm just giving a little tension with the trim removal tool upward to get them out. There we go.
So you unscrew this hand nut or plastic nut.
You're making up terms in this video.
when you're getting to this ECU, you need to pull back the carpet. So we're gonna pull this back just a little bit. And then there's gonna be 3 bolts, one here, and one here to free this from the sidewall. And those are all 10 millimeter. The reason we're gonna do that is it's gonna be easier to free these plugs, and you may have to do that anyways in order for these plugs to be free and come out the other side through the firewall.
Getting these 3 plugs out of the ECU wasn't too hard for Brendan. When it got to these other 2 plugs that plug into the body harness right here that are part of the engine wiring harness, those were hard to get undone. So we first pulled this clip out of the body to get a little more movement. We had to work at it, and at one point we had to get a little screwdriver in there to help pry up, especially this gray one right here, because there's not a lot of the male plug sticking up above for you to get your hands onto. You have another white connector right behind it. So you got to get those 2 undone from this harness right here, and then now we can push this assembly through the firewall. We're on the passenger side of the firewall, and you'll see the grommet in the far corner. I'm gonna reach my hand in there and pull that grommet free of the firewall. Now that I got the grommet out of the firewall, we found that the harness here on the passenger fender has clips that run through the fender, and we can release those clips from the inside of the fender well. I'm gonna use a needle nose pliers and compress them and try to push them up. Brendan's gonna pull from the top, okay. There we go. A bunch of connectors come off the main harness on this passenger side fender and go to these vacuum switches. So we're gonna disconnect all these vacuum switches now. We're having a hard time getting our fingers on the connectors. We're just gonna pull all these vacuum hoses off this plenum because we're not gonna be reusing all these vacuum hoses anyways. There's only one that goes to these 4-wheel drive vacuum actuated switches here. We are gonna keep these, but all these other ones aren't gonna be kept. We're gonna get rid of them. So we're just gonna remove all these hoses out of our way so we have more room to get these connectors disconnected.
It's so much easier to not have to label every one of these like I did last time. I'm very good at pulling out. That's why I have 4 kids.
Whoa, easy, Pilgrim, easy.
If you're keeping your 3-liter, make sure that you label every single one of these where they're plugging in at, so you keep track of where all these vacuum lines go.
We're having trouble with these plugs. We've got 3 of them out. We got a last one, and to get a better access, we're just gonna remove the 2 10 millimeter bolts that hold this whole assembly to the fender. I already removed one over here, and then I'm working on this other one closer to the engine. We're gonna get these vacuum lines disconnected. We finally got this Medusa, you know, the snakes on your head. We got this thing out of here so we can get this wiring harness free. Man, what a bear it was to get these plugs undone. That was a lot of work. A lot more work than we thought, but we got this sucker out of the way. The fuse box looks like it's gonna hinder us pulling this wiring harness back because this thing's really rigid. We're gonna loosen the 2 10 millimeter bolts that hold the fuse box to the body to where we can manipulate it out of the way of the harness. Can we move it much? Is there another one that's holding us there? Really can't get much movement out of it anyways.
No, I think it's just glued onto the fender right there.
Oh, there's a clip. There's a clip that plugs it into there. There we go. Get a little more movement out of there, okay. This diagnostic is connected here. We want to remove this too. Now, how do we do that? When we were trying to disconnect this diagnostic from the fuse box, it fought us and we thought maybe there's some type of clip. There isn't a clip. You can pull it straight up off of here. There's no clip. You just have to slide it up, but it might be locked in there pretty good. While we're here, we're gonna disconnect the small connector to the AC. Now I think we're ready to go. Brendan's gonna be inside feeding the plugs to me, and I'm gonna be pulling outward. What is hanging us up here? Hold on a second. It's really locked in here, huh? Where do these go? We're pulling on these pretty good. We can mark these and take these off. Maybe we'll get this one off too. It's free. Okay, I think we're better off now. Okay, go ahead, Brendan. You can start pulling out again. We're giving birth. I see the cord. Hold on a second. Let me get this plug out. These 2 are coming out at the same time. There we go. That one. It's twins. It's twins. Okay, we got the wiring harness out of the interior from where it connects up to the ECU. We're going to disconnect this hose that goes from the plenum, wraps around, and goes all the way to the brake booster. We're going to disconnect it from two ends. This passenger side end, and then we're going to disconnect this vacuum hose that attaches here. Let's lay that out of the way. I'm going to hand this over to Brendan. Disconnect it off of the brake booster right there. A lot of pressure on it.
There was.
Yeah, brake booster's working. We have a small vacuum line going to this charcoal canister. I'm going to disconnect this one. We're now going to work on disconnecting the throttle cable and the cruise control cable. You get two open end 12 millimeter wrenches and you just loosen them, turning away from each other. Just back it off just a little bit and you can slip it off the bracket like that. You can rotate this and get the cable out. Slide that sucker out. So that sucker's disconnected. Gotta get it off of here too, this clamp. You gotta free it of these two clamps right here. And let's just flop this over here. Maybe put it on the windshield wiper. And now we're gonna do the same with the cruise control cable. This is a different doohickey. What kind of doohickey is this? Oh, you gotta release that bolt. You got 10. We're gonna remove this Dumaflachi Chingadera. And then now, oh, look at that. And that sucker's free. We're just gonna tuck this over here against the body. This harness that connects to the engine wraps around the inside of the passenger fender, and two connectors come off this harness and connect up to the ignition coil, and we're gonna disconnect those. And we'll just flop this sucker on top of the engine.
They were attached to these, but we took them off.
We're now going to work on the heater hose disconnects at the firewall. We're choosing to attack it at a couple points. This hose goes from the firewall, comes through here to a metal pipe, and connects up here and drops down to the engine. We're going to loosen this clamp and push it down and try to break it free here. The second disconnect we're going to do is this one that drops down to the engine. It comes up here and it connects up to this metal pipe that's a T. It tees down and goes to the rear heater, and then it loops around and hooks up to the heater control valve. So this has that funky style of clamp that you have to kind of unroll to disconnect. Those are the two spots that we're gonna work on to disconnect. I'm gonna use a straight nose, needle nose pliers to compress this and push that clamp down. Guaranteed these are gonna be on there, so I'm gonna use a hose pick and see if I can free it a little bit. We're using two hose tools. Let's see if we can work this thing off here. We're having trouble disconnecting the hose at this connection, so we're now attacking it right here with this type of clamp that unwinds. I think that's unwound all the way now, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just came out. This minute.
Dueling swords. Don't cross swords, boys.
We're just deciding to cut these things off now. They're a pain in the butt.
Now we're getting a pick tool in there and just working the connection free.
Now that we have this loose, if we remove this, and then we can twist this pipe.
So my original plan to disconnect the heater hoses failed miserably, but then Ton came to the rescue and came up with a better idea. So I was trying to just disconnect it from here, and that wasn't working. So then we disconnected this one from this metal T, got that one out of the way. Then we disconnected this one that attaches to this hose that goes to the firewall, and then finally we're able to twist this metal connection up out of this other hose that leads down to the back of the engine. So now we've tackled the heater hose part of it. Next, we're going to work on disconnecting the power steering high pressure hose and the return hose. I want to limit the mess, so I'm going to use this Midivac fluid extractor and I'm going to draw as much fluid out of the reservoir as I can. This is a lot better than using a syringe because it holds a lot more. Oh. Squirter. You've got a squirter. Oh, that was it. I shot my wad. Oh, making a mess already. Give me a rag. Now that we've drawn most of the fluid out of the reservoir, we're going to disconnect the return hose, which is a low pressure hose, and that looks like it's a 10 millimeter clamp that I'm going to loosen. A little bit of leaked out, not bad. You know, I get a silicone plug for that, and let's plug that. Now we're going to disconnect the high pressure connection to the power steering pump. It's a 22 millimeter banjo bolt. I'm going to get on here with the box end wrench. Oh, line's moving. Shit. When I tried to break free this 22 millimeter banjo bolt, what ended up loosening is the connection of this lock nut to the pump housing. So Brendan's going to hold this with a 24 millimeter open end while I try to break this free. Oh, God. Okay, so let's get a 22 millimeter socket on there.
Ready?
See, I had to hold it. This guy over here was
How about that?
too. We're now working on disconnecting the AC compressor from the engine. The two bottom bolts are pretty easy to get to. I already got those off with a box end 12 millimeter, but the upper ones we can't really see. So we're thinking we're gonna disconnect this power steering bracket and then see if that gives us enough room. And if not, we're just gonna disconnect the power steering pump all the way from the engine and pull it off to the side and see if we can get a better look. There's a 14 millimeter nut here and there's two 14 millimeter bolts here. To get to the final bolt for that bracket, the bolt head faces backwards towards the rear of the vehicle, and I'm going to get on to that with a box end 14, a long sucker. Now that I broke it free, I'm going to ratchet it out the rest of the way. Okay, that's loose. I have to hold on to the bracket now. Okay, we got this sucker off. I can see the front one now pretty good, but I can't see the back one very good. This front top one I was able to get with a long 12 millimeter box end, broke it free, and then now I could get my hand in there and loosen it. The one that looks like it's gonna be a nightmare is the back one on the top, and we're gonna have to figure out how to get to that one. We were really struggling to get that upper back AC compressor bolt out. We were trying all different angles from up above, and then finally Brendan saw that there's an access hatch in this passenger side wheel well. There's 4 10 millimeter bolts, and then you can remove this hatch out of your way, and then you can get a pretty good shot with a long extension and a 12 millimeter socket to get on that last bolt.
Right here, there was also a 10 millimeter bolt that fastens this line to the motor mount, and you can remove that and pull it down.
This is a wiring harness, huh?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah. We're now going to disconnect the clutch release fluid line from this connection right here. It's a 10 millimeter, just like a brake line. I'm going to use a flex head flare nut wrench. Break that sucker free. I have a 7/32 vacuum cap that as soon as I make the disconnect, I'm going to plug it so it's not dripping all over the place. Oh, there's nothing in there. We're going to follow this line down. It goes to a bracket that attaches to the engine, and then there's another connection that goes down to the slave cylinder. I'm going to disconnect that connection too. I don't like to turn it, dude. I can't turn it. The whole bracket's flexing. That other line that went down to a bracket that attached to the passenger side of the motor, I couldn't break free that connection. I didn't have enough room to turn my wrench. So what I did is I disconnected the two 12 millimeter bolts that hold the clutch slave cylinder to the bell housing. I used a 1/4 inch ratchet and a short 12 millimeter socket, and I was able to break these free. So now when we remove the engine, this clutch slave cylinder will come with the engine. Lastly, I'm going to want to remove this clip. It's like a brake line clip, and you want to pull this out so the line is not going to be attached to this bracket that holds the line to the body. There we go. And then that should push through. So now we have the clutch lines all disconnected. They're not going to hold up the engine coming out. We have the vehicle jacked up as high as we can with 6-ton jack stands to have room to work underneath. We think we're done with the engine compartment work to get the engine out. Now we're gonna start disconnecting all the electrical connections to the transmission and transfer case. The factory service manual actually says to remove the transmission and engine as one unit, and no way are we gonna do that. So our plan is to make all the disconnects of the harness to the transmission and transfer case, and then when we pull the engine, this part of the harness is going to come with the engine. That's our goal. Starting on the passenger side, right above the clutch boot, there's a 10mm bolt that holds a wiring harness bracket, and I'm going to zip that out with my Milwaukee ratchet. Okay, so you see that sucker's free. There's a connector here. I don't know what this connector is, but I'm going to disconnect it. That's disconnected. Move backwards and see if there's anything else. Okay, I see one connector here, and where that disconnects, I don't know. It has a tab, and you pull it towards you and you can disconnect it. This little tab right here, you pull towards you. There's another connector here. These type of clips go over a metal post, and if you pull the plastic tab outward, then you could slide it up off of the post. We have this connector back here. Maybe it's a speed sensor. Oh, it's that one right there. There we go. So that's all free. Man, this is seeming pretty easy with this older truck. There's one up there. On this driver's side, the harness comes over the top, and it was zip tied to a couple spots on this cross member, and then it goes to the O2 sensor, and this one was a bear to get disconnected because of the grit in there. It actually took 3 of us, one to hold each side of the connector and another one to get the pick tool in here to lift up this connector to get it free. This one was super stuck, so the 3 amigos got it finally. So I think we got the whole harness disconnected now. Pull it over the top. Yeah, keep going. That was it. That's easy. It's coming still. That's it, man. That's the harness disconnected from the transmission and transfer case. Wow, easy. Another thing we need to disconnect is the fuel line connection. This female side right here goes up and attaches to the fuel rails behind the plenums. I'm going to support this female side with a 19mm flare nut, and then I'm going to break free this side with a 14mm flare nut. And we are viewing this from the passenger front wheel well. There was a mud flap in this area, and we removed it to have better access to it. So I'm going to come in with the 19 first, get it on to the female fitting, and then I'm going to get my 14 one on there and go lefty-loosey and break it free. And there's going to be fuel coming out, so don't be smoking dope and jumping rope while you're doing this. Do that later, after you finish the job. Shit. So we got it disconnected. This nut was fighting me a little bit, and if you want a quicker way to get it out once you got it broken free with the flare nut, you can use an open end 14, and it's easier to reset the wrench multiple times with an open end rather than a flare nut. So now we have this disconnected. In the next clips, you're going to see us working on disconnecting the exhaust pipe from the exhaust flange on the passenger side of the transmission. It fought us pretty hard, mainly the nut that's closest to the transmission, because we had limited access to get in there with the extensions. At first I tried to get a 1/2 inch extension in there, and then I finally resorted to using 3/8 extensions that I could sneak in there. But then after the fact, I thought, why did we even do that? Because we weren't planning on keeping the exhaust anyways. We could have got in there with a reciprocating saw, sawed the pipe on each side of the exhaust bracket that bolts to the bell housing, and then been done with it. We didn't have to mess with it. Another thing later on is you're going to see that exhaust bracket get in the way of us getting one of the 17mm bell housing bolts. So that's another reason to just cut the sucker out and get it out of your way, because we couldn't disconnect that bracket because the bracket nut stripped on us because it was rusty and we couldn't get it off. If you don't plan on trying to salvage that exhaust system like most people aren't, Brennan wasn't going to try to reuse that, so we could have just cut that out and saved us some aggravation and some time. But if you are going to try to salvage and use that exhaust system for your 3.4 liter engine, then you're going to have to fight it like we did. So we just wanted to let you know that cut the damn thing out if you're not going to reuse that exhaust system. It will be way easier for you. We're now working on disconnecting the exhaust pipe from the crossover flange. It's held on by 3 14mm nuts. I was able to get 2 of them free. I have a deep 14 millimeter socket. I strung together a bunch of 1/2-inch drive extensions, and I was able to get the one on the outermost through this access closest to the driver's side of the vehicle. I was also able to get the bottom one too from this orientation. As you see here, I can't get in from here because the tailpipe comes really close to the bell housing. I can't sneak in there with the extension. So we're gonna now try to get to that one from the driver's side wheel well. We're gonna remove this heat shield out of here that attaches to the driver's side frame to see if we can give more access to turn a wrench from inside the wheel well. It's held on with 12 millimeter bolts. Is that it? Or is there one more in the front?
There's one more.
I can't see that one.
You supporting that?
Yep.
Beautiful.
We're still having trouble getting that upper innermost exhaust flange nut off because there's just not enough access to turn a wrench from the wheel well either. So now we're going to disconnect this bracket that attaches the exhaust to the bell housing, and we're going to see if we can pry the exhaust a little bit towards the driver's side to get a socket and extension in there. It doesn't move at all. Okay, tapping out. Ton, here.
I gotta go on the other side.
It's just flexing, man.
Got it?
Yeah.
Dude, strong.
Good thing you hit your hand on the tire, dude. Almost. Yeah, that's all.
So?
Yeah. That's why they call you the Toolman.
We're now going for the starter removal. There's two connections. You have the positive power connection that I'm pointing to right there. It's a 12 millimeter nut. And then there's the exciter wire that you have to disconnect. That's a plug. I'm getting in here with my Milwaukee ratchet and I'm gonna spin that out. I'm coming in the front with a long 1/2-inch extension and a wobble socket. Should have hooked up a gun to it.
I think it's out. You just missed it. There you go.
Is the starter starting to loosen now? Can you support it? I got fuel dripping on me. Is it moving?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Plug this fuel line. It's fueling.
It feels really loose now. Is that out?
Yeah.
Yeah, don't go on too.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
All right. Now I've got more room to look in there. We were having a hard time figuring out which direction to take the starter out. And then Brendan saw if we remove the heat shield for this passenger side exhaust manifold, that gave us enough room to sneak it out right through here. We also pulled the wiring harness up through the top to get it out of our way because it was dangling in this area. Now the starter is out. So you have the two connections. This one for the positive power to the starter, and this is the exciter wire that we disconnected. We actually loosened the starter first and then rotated it to where this was facing out, and then we were able to grab it and pull it out from the wheel well. I just stripped. I just stripped it. This bracket that attaches to the exhaust and then goes to the bell housing, we already removed it, and I thought I can loosen this connection to be able to slide this bracket back on the pipe so I can get access to this 17 millimeter bell housing bolt behind it, but the nut just stripped out. It didn't work. So I pulled down on the exhaust pipe, I freed it of the exhaust flange studs, and then I was able to pull it away just enough to where I could sneak a 3/8 extension in there with the 17 millimeter socket, and I was able to get it free. And so you might have the same thing. That bracket has been on there for a while, rusty, and you might not be able to get it off. The other option is you cut it off. We did it this way. So got a bell housing bolt out. We're gonna work on the rest of the bell housing bolts. They're a mix of 14 millimeter head bolts on the bottom and 17 millimeter ones on the top. So I'm gonna work on the rest of these three 14 millimeters now. So I'm accessing these with about an 18-inch extension with a 14 millimeter wobble socket, and I'm using my gun. We're gonna keep tabs on these and make sure that if they are different size, we're gonna keep track of where they go. Those the same length? Yep. So far, the 14mm bolts are the same length. All right, that looks like everything. Well, I could go for a 17mm one up above here. After getting those 4 14mm bolts that attach the bell housing to brackets that bolt to the engine block, I did say at first there was only 3, but there's actually 4, 2 per side. Then we worked on getting the 17mm bolts out that are on the upper side of the bell housing that attach the bell housing to the block. For most of those, I use this really long 31-inch half-inch extension. It has a locking capability where you can slide on a socket, or what I use, the wobble socket, and it locks it in to where it can't fall off on you. So you don't actually have to reach up and get in there with a ratchet and socket and short extension. When you have a long extension like this, you can come way from the back with more comfort, and those wobble sockets in conjunction with an extension like this make getting those bell housing bolts really, really easy. You good?
Yeah. You're good. You're out.
You got it, bro, Chacho.
Is it on there good?
Yep.
See if I get the gun on there. The hardest bell housing bolt to get is the upper one on the driver's side. The way I got it is I have this, I think it's about a 32-inch extension, and then I connected that to a short wobble extension. And you can see with the wobble extension, it gives you a little bit of articulation with the socket that you have on there. And then I went along the top side of the driver's side to the right of the exhaust pipe. I fed it up in there, and then Brendan went into the wheel well on the driver's side fender and helped guide me. And then he could tell me that I got the socket onto the bolt, and then I was able to get my half-inch drive ratchet onto the extension and break it free. That's what we suggest. You get someone to help you because you're blind when you're underneath the truck feeding the extension up towards the front of the bell housing. We're really close to getting this engine out. We know when we pull the engine free of the bell housing, all of a sudden the transmission is going to be front heavy because it has nothing to support it, and it's going to want to flop down right onto the differential. So we have a ratchet strap running from side to side, supporting the weight underneath the bell housing area, so when the engine removes, it's not going to move anymore. It's not going to drop down and put undue stress on the transmission mount on the cross member behind it. We're working on the motor mounts now. We're in the passenger side fender. I'm using 2 14mm wrenches, an open end to hold the bolt steady because it might turn on you like it was on me. And then on the top, I have a ratcheting 14mm, and I broke them both free doing it that way. And then once they're broken free, you should be able to get in here and remove the nut off the top. So now we're in the driver's side fender well, breaking these free. Same technique, open end 14 on the bolt head and ratcheting 14 on the top. So that's loose. Probably get off your fingers now.
Yeah.
You're going to see in the next scenes that we're working on getting the engine out of the vehicle. We have the Harbor Freight 2-ton engine hoist attached to the engine leveler, and then that engine leveler with the chains is hooked up to 2 points on the engine. That 3.0 liter engine comes stock with 2 lift points. One on the back side of the passenger side, the bracket connects up to the head, and then there's another one on the front passenger side that connects up to the head also. And so that's what the chains are connected to, so we can lift the engine out of the engine compartment. And as we're lifting the engine out, you will get a visualization of what those brackets look like on the driver and passenger sides. To get the motor out, you'll want to lower the front end of your vehicle as low as possible. And that means taking the wheels off and supporting it on jack stands and getting it as low as you can, but still high enough to where you can get the legs of your hoist underneath the rig. You'll want to do that because your hoist will only be able to lift up so high, and then you won't be able to clear the body to get the engine out. On this Harbor Freight 2-ton hoist, we have it on the half-ton setting, 1,000 pounds, because that's going to give us the most lift. We have this fancy load leveler. We'll see how it works. We have a little bit of tension on this, and now we have to free the engine from the bell housing, and we have to overcome those alignment pins. So we actually have to kind of tug on this to get it back. Can you look underneath and see if we're getting some separation?
Oh yeah, it's moving.
It's moving?
On the top, you got about ½ inch away, but then it goes right back. Try to lift up a little more on the
Lift up on the hoist.
On the hoist. Try to tug on the engine again. Okay, now you've separated about maybe a centimeter. Nah, just a couple millimeters. Keep going. Okay, stop. Now you're not doing anything.
Okay.
Lower it a little bit.
Lower a little bit.
Just a little bit. I mean, it's moving, but it sits right back to where it was. So we need to pull on the engine hoist backwards as Timmy is pulling.
There you go.
There you go. Now you've got some.
In the next scenes, you're going to see that I disappear, and where I ended up going was underneath the vehicle to get a better bird's eye view of how we needed to manipulate the engine to get it separated from the transmission. At one point, I grabbed the pry bar and I got it in between the bell housing and the engine block, and I pried to where I pushed the engine forward and I got a little bit more separation. But then I noticed that the input shaft of the transmission was hung up on the pressure plate, and we had to make some adjustments with the load leveler to get the engine to tilt a little bit more forward and get it to shift a little bit, and that helped get the input shaft a little bit further away from the pressure plate. And then I grabbed a bigger pry bar and I pried a little bit more, and we were finally able to get the input shaft from hanging up on the pressure plate. Another thing that was hanging up was the flywheel was dragging on the bell housing, and we fixed that by just simply jacking up on the motor a little bit, getting it a little bit better centered on the bell housing, and then we were finally able to pull the engine free of the transmission, and then we had to work on the next steps to get the engine fully out of the engine compartment. Yeah, it's free. Move it again. I think it's going to pick up because the flywheel's stuck on the bell housing. So pick up on the motor a little bit.
Done.
Now move it.
I think we're lifting the transmission with it though.
You have to clear the flywheel now. Is the motor mount stopping us?
No.
Slide back.
Not on this side.
I pulled it out more.
So the motor mount is hitting on the.
Can you pick up now or?
Go up.
Go up a little more. Yeah, you're getting it. It's the clutch is coming. Yeah, there you go. It was off the input shaft. Lower the engine down a little bit. I think you're on the input shaft. Okay.
Stop.
I think you can pull backwards now.
Is it free? Okay, hold on.
It's
hold
on the input.
Still on the input shaft?
If you pull back just a little bit more, it'll clear it. There's a little bracket that holds the AC line to the power steering pump, and it's capturing the wiring harness as we're pulling the engine out. So we have to undo this bracket so we can free the wiring harness.
Engine harness.
That's good for now.
More happy. If we could tilt this actually, if we could tilt the engine, this
It needs
needs to
to
come
tilt
up
forward.
and this needs to go down.
Or?
Yep. Keep going till it's like just like right here.
But also if we could pull it forward.
Okay, if you just pull it back a little bit because it's still sitting on the input shaft. You want to let the engine down a little bit, and then
We gotta let it down. Yeah.
No, it's hooked on there. I don't like that. It's putting more weight on the input shaft. You want to just see if you can start cranking up and going up.
Yeah.
Hold up.
Give
Stop.
me a bigger pry bar. I want to see if I can pull back on it. I got pressure off the input shaft.
Okay,
So
well,
where are you stuck on the?
We got to go up enough to clear that AC bracket and then
Okay.
go forward.
Yeah, you're clear of the input shaft now.
There you go.
All right, I guess this is the money shot.
I want the money shot too. Do we want to adjust this now to more level or no?
You love using that thing. The adjuster. Timmy the adjuster.
We're not messing up any heater lines, are we?
We just leave it. It's coming up fine.
Okay, keep on going. I'm gonna play with this at the same time.
You catching on anything else?
Well, I'm trying to fish this underneath that hose.
We're gonna take this cover off the harness to make the harness more flexible and just set this aside.
It's getting caught under the AC line. Oh, you got it. There you go.
Did you get it free?
On, hook on.
And then
This
it's
has to
taped
come down.
again. There we go.
There we go.
All right, now it'll probably
Now you'll snake it.
go easier.
Let's keep cranking.
Hey, somebody watching the back so we don't mess up the heater hose.
Yeah,
Watch
I'm
the
watching.
heater.
Oh, wait, stop. Now it's hitting.
Okay, so pull forward. Don't hit the
Okay,
AC.
stop. Now go up.
Okay, up.
You're clear in the back, so there's some shit here. What is this? Stop. What is right here? What is this?
Catching on the AC.
You gotta undo this.
No, those are just vacuum lines. Just undo these vacuum lines. There you go.
All right, done. Hold it. Back here.
What?
What is this line for?
Let me see. I can't see.
This one and this one.
What did we miss over here?
It's the main fuel line, but it was disconnected, but we just got to disconnect it over here now. As we were lifting up the engine, there were some things that were still hanging us up. We disconnected the fuel line, but there's these plastic bands that attach the fuel line to other lines, and it was coming with it. This other hose we forgot to disconnect is the fuel return hose that connects to piping on the plenum and leads to the passenger side firewall. There we go. Ready?
Go up.
Stop. We've got a ground wire.
There's a ground strap that attaches to the passenger side of the block that we didn't disconnect, and we have to disconnect that now. It's right on the front side of the body mount. God damn. If you have the manpower, it's really helpful to have a person on each side of the motor looking for anything that you forgot to disconnect, which we did. We just found a few things that we didn't disconnect. You also want to make sure that you're not damaging the heater valve at the firewall, because that's a common one too. You come up and you mess up the heater valve. And then another one is you come too far forward and you smash the front of the engine into your AC condenser. So don't do that either. So now we're going to keep on keeping on, get this engine out. Really clear, huh?
All clear.
Okay, let's work together to pull this back. And let's get that thing on the dolly. We could drop it right on that, huh?
Yeah. This bracket's going to be in the way.
Are you ready to go down? You can take it off if you want. We could zip it off right now.
I think we should, because I think
Okay.
this is going to cradle perfectly in here.
You want to save?
We're just taking off the clutch and the pressure plate, and then we're going to take out the flywheel so it sits in this little cradle that we made to hold the engine. It's hung up on the front a little bit.
There's a tensioner right here, the bracket. You gotta take that out.
Zip it off with a 14. There's another one here. Nope, it's hooked on the front again. What is it hooked on? Is this not fitting in the wood very well?
No, it's just not. Yeah, the oil pin I think is a little different.
A little bit thicker.
I mean, we can try to cut that out.
Thicker like a
Just
Snicker.
cut it up.
Advance them.
All right, this is the end of part 1. Join us in part 2, where we show you a few things we do inside the engine compartment with the 3.0 liter engine out of the engine compartment. And then we're gonna share with you a bunch of the things you need to do to the 3.4 liter engine for this 3.0 to 3.4 swap on a second generation 4Runner.